the St. Helena Psalter. Happy are they who have the God of Jacob for their help, whose hope is in their God, who made heaven and earth, the seas, and all that is in them, whose promise abides forever, who gives justice to those who are oppressed and food to those who hunger. God sets the prisoners free and opens the eyes of the blind. God lifts up those who are bowed down. God loves the righteous and cares for the stranger. God sustains the orphan and widow, but frustrates the way of the wicked.
Kathy, you're on.
Thank you, Teresa and Ellen. I can't tell you how wonderful it is to see everybody. Uh so if only by Zoom. I miss you, and I apologize for being so terrible about communicating. It's hard to believe that I've been away for 3.5 years. Our son Michael, whom many of you saw soon after he was brought home from the hospital, is going to graduate from Boston College this May. Which is hard to believe. And anyway, praise God. But thank you for your steady support of him and the trauma work that I've been doing in Africa, which really started and continued with gifts from this church. I've now been doing for more than 11 years. I had visions of writing Hyde Park a love letter after I left, but I'm afraid it's one of my many undone tasks. All I can say is that I love you and I miss you and I thank you. I really wanted to be there in person, but I was committed to being at a vigil at the Navy base next to the place where I live. And Christine persuaded me it was probably better not to try to make the drive in one night, in one cold night. So, uh, one one word about where I live. Uh, so Bill and I are the caretakers. I sometimes call myself the resident activist. Oh, are you okay hearing me and seeing me, Linda? While I It's okay. Okay, good. Thank you. You never know. So one word about the place where I live now. Bill and I are the caretakers and I'm like the resident activist, which a title is self-titled, resident activist at the Ground Zero Center for Nonviolent Action, which is right next to the Bangor Naval Base in Kitsap County, Washington, not too far from Boise. The base houses nuclear submarines and is home to approximately 1,000 nuclear bombs. Some of them are 455 kilotons in explosive power, whereas the bomb that exploded exactly 80 years this year ago over Hiroshima was just 15. Again, that some of these bombs over here are 450, and the one that destroyed so much of Hiroshima was just 15. These weapons are stored less than a mile and a half from the chair that I'm sitting in right at this moment. On the other hand, we're on 3.8 acres of beautiful land with a lot of forest and graceful cedars that are hundreds of years old, and ferns, many ferns, and native rhododendrons, and all kinds of interesting mosses, and probably a million mushrooms. So it's a very interesting place, and I hope you'll come see me. Right now, we have about 20 something young people from the University of Washington that have slept over. They had a slumber party last night, and they're doing planning. A lot of them were camping out last year regarding Gaza, and they're doing some wonderful organizing work. So it's a real joy and inspiration for me. So on to my message now. And first, I'll just pray. May only God's word be spoken and only God's word be heard. It feels very meaningful to me to be speaking on the day before we honor the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. I have his picture here. This is in my little office. I it's well, I keep it kind of here just as an inspiration to me. Um, and And it's also the day, of course, before Donald J. Trump becomes president again. So the topic I chose to speak on is building the beloved community, which was a theme of Martin's. And and has kept me going a lot. So I thought we could start this time by just everybody stopping for 1 minute, 60 seconds, and just think about what a beloved community would look like and feel like to them. So take 1 minute and think about what a beloved community would look like to you. Thank you. So at first, when I was working on this, I was preparing for a message on the theme of loving your enemy, and thinking primarily of political enemies, kind of given the tenor of our time. I read a lot of Dr. King's writings and was very inspired by his thoughts on Jesus's command to love our enemies. And I recommend his writings to everyone, especially this weekend if you have a chance. Uh, However, when I wrote the question to myself, like how to start building the beloved community, my brain could not get away from the idea of possible mass deportations that have been repeatedly threatened and could begin as early as tomorrow, or at least the foundations for them, or even are happening now. So, as many of you know, I've spent most of the last 30 years, almost all of it, as an immigration attorney. And even before that, going back to 1982, since that time, I've been doing significant work with the refugees from different countries. So, to me, the threat of mass deportations, that is tearing apart parents from children, husbands from wives, loved ones from grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, is precisely the opposite of creating a beloved community. It generates fear and hatred and has the potential to create mass trauma. And I do know a lot about trauma. I mean, I've been working with traumatized people for a long time. Uh, it's also this thread of mass deportations. To me, it's also precisely the opposite of the biblical command to care for or to welcome the stranger that we find in both the Old Testament and the New Testament, both in the passage that Ellen read and also from Jesus's command in Matthew 25, to feed the hungry, give water to the poor, welcome the stranger, and visit the sick and those in prison. So welcoming the stranger is hardly arresting them in their homes or workplace or church or school or hospital and throwing them into a prison-like detention center. And I've seen those places and I've talked to people in those places. And and I know that they're devastating and trauma causing. So, in a lot of you have heard multiple times my presentation about the work in Africa, but the thing that made the most impact on me when I first started working with these people in the trauma program, which was developed by genocide survivors in Rwanda and Burundi, there are three concentric circles, and in the center circle is the individual, and then the outer circle, the next level out is the family, and then the next level out in this circle is the community. And we have discussed many times, I now I have with hundreds of trauma survivors, how when you've got an individual who's suffering the symptoms of trauma, which could be all kinds of things, uh, mental health problems, substance abuse, uh, depression, anger, they could have physical problems, cognitive problems. Anyway, when you've got an individual suffering from all these various symptoms, it naturally affects their family, their household. And then when you've got a household that's in turmoil, that tumultuous family is going to affect the surrounding community. And as people in Rwanda pointed out to me, not only at the community, it can actually spread to the international level then, and especially today when we are such a globalized world or interconnected world. So that was kind of the negative part about trauma. The positive part about the program was that if you can help this individual to heal, this individual in the center of these circles to heal, and strengthen that individual, that individual can go on to strengthen their family and help to make a stronger family. And when you have more stronger families in a community, that in turn strengthens the community. Well, it sounds pretty obvious, but I don't know, for me, it has really been life-changing. So I decided as a peacemaker that this seemed to be a wonderful way to make peace, to work towards for peace, was to help people heal from trauma at an individual level and a community level. And so now here I am in my own country, and I see this program that I think is going to cause, that I know from my experience, if it really is carried out, will cause mass trauma. Uh, I'm starting to think, well, I have been thinking for a while, what can we do? What can we do as Christians to do this, to address this and try to prevent, do as much as we can to mitigate the trauma and the harm that's going to be caused. And it's not like this hasn't been happening for many years already. So I started practicing in 1990, and at the same time, that's the last time we had a major change in the law was 1990, right when I came in, and they put in some pretty harsh provisions, draconian, I would say, provisions, like if somebody entered illegally, they couldn't legalize their status even if they married, unless they went back to their home country. And if they went back to their home country, they triggered a 10-year bar where they're supposed to stay outside the country, away from their US citizen spouse and children, for 10 years, unless they qualify for a waiver. Anyway, so it's just the laws are unjust. And so anyway, so I have kind of firsthand experience of what happens, a lot of firsthand experience of what happens when people are uprooted, either in this kind of way or by force, increasingly by climate change. Um, so I'm wondering what can we do to address this as Christians? There is, and I guess first the question comes up, should we? I know our country is divided on this issue, but well, if you haven't guessed already, I am firmly biased. I'm definitely very biased based on my experience. One of my favorite Psalms is on a professional level is Psalm 87. And it talks about and it's not long, it's about Zion. And it says, "So glorious things are spoken of you, O city of our God. I count Egypt and Babylon among those who know me. Behold, Philistia, Palestine, Tyre and Ethiopia, in Zion were they born. Of Zion it shall be said, everyone was born there, and the Most High God shall sustain it. God will record in the roll of the peoples, like God's paperwork, immigration records. Uh, these also were born there." So, in God's eyes, we're all citizens, we're all documented, nobody is undocumented. Nobody is subject to arbitrary arrest and detention and separation from their families. In God's eyes, everybody is a citizen. Uh, the last verse is one of my favorites. Um, the singers and the dancers will say, "All my fresh springs are in you." It seemed kind of unconnected, but as I was reading it again, I think in this country, all our fresh springs are in people, in human migration. And human migration, like other animal migration, has always been happening since humans were created. So that kind of answers why, are we called to do this? And it's because no human being is illegal. Uh, we are all created in the image of God, and nobody is superior. Nobody has a superior claim, in my mind, to any part of earth. All the earth belongs to God. We all belong to God, and we need to share. I think that's the message that I feel I'm called to give. But in terms of kind of more concrete things, I think the first step, I believe, is prayer. Um, that we need prayer because these are very difficult they're difficult times and difficult problems. Um, One of the inspiring things I got from uh, Dr. King is he talks about his pilgrimage to nonviolence and how he was reading these different philosophers and how a couple of his theological school professors, he admired them because they had a deep faith in the possibility of human beings when they allowed themselves to become co-workers with God. So the way may be difficult for us to see, and I love the banner that give light to this uncertain path because that is how it feels. Uh, but King goes on to say that he realized at Boston University that Reinhold Niebuhr, one of the people he'd been reading, had overemphasized the corruption of human nature. Um, I think Niebuhr had been complaining about kind of Christians, I think, superficial optimism, that wasn't really grounded in fact. But what King discovered, he said, he came to see that Niebuhr had overemphasized the corruption of human nature. His pessimism concerning human nature was not balanced by an optimism concerning divine nature, which can be a source of inspiration for us. He said he was so involved in diagnosing man's sickness of sin that he overlooked the cure of grace. So, to me, that reminds me that even if a problem seems unsurmountable, that God can make a way where there seems to be no way. But we have to commit ourselves to being co-workers with God and being part of this, not to just standing back, which I think is the real risk. Some of you might remember me preaching once about Father Alfred Delp, D-E-L-P, from Germany, and he was executed by the Germans because he continued to meet with a small group of people during the Nazi era to plan for the end of what life would be like at the end of the Nazi era. So they just stayed focused and kept on planning for peace, and that's what I feel we're called to do. So anyway, first, this back to my list, my to-do list. So first, pray and trust that God will make a way for each of us and us collectively to act. Uh, then the different levels, I think we can work at every single level, need to work at every single level now, at the international level. And I've been privileged to work at the international level and to see kind of firsthand what causes people to leave their home countries. And I see a lot of it is conflict. A lot of times people are forced to leave because of conflict and war. Increasingly, climate change is causing people to have to leave. In parts of East Africa, there's no water. There's no water for people's animals, and that's how they survive. So they have to leave, and then sometimes that in turn generates conflict, which causes more disruption. Um, Closer to home with like a lot of our undocumented population is from Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras. A lot of that migration is fueled in part by the drug crisis in the United States, the untreated drug crisis in the United States, that cartels, and this is Colombia too, as those of us who went to Colombia know about the situation with the cartels there and the danger and chaos that they've caused there. And some of that is clearly related to our addiction crisis in the United States. So we can identify these problems, and then there are actions we can take in terms of conflict and war. We can scrutinize whether we and our tax dollars, our government, our elected representatives are causing policies that are causing people to flee their homes, and do what we can to change those policies. Say with climate change, the same, and even changes we can make in our personal lives, to try to reduce our own carbon footprints. And and many of you in the church I know are already working on these issues and have been for decades. So thank you. And I think we need to work together also, because it can get kind of defeating if you just feel like you're out there working on this stuff by yourself. At the national level, bringing it back again to immigration, we do have terrible laws regarding immigration, and Congress has not made a serious change in 30 years. Kind of, so they're like totally paralyzed. So there are things that can be done at that level and advocacy, in terms of making a fairer process. And also at the national level, we can call out hate speech. Hates this speech that is causing more division and hatred and fear. A lot of it is fear-based. Uh, so we can do what we can to not be afraid. I mean, and perfect love casts out all fear. Um, at the state level, I know it's a lot different in Washington than it is in Idaho, but I still think I think there are many things that can be done in Idaho at the state level. There are going to be uh, many farmers and dairy farmers, who are going to be severely impacted by this agricultural community. So I think there are potentials for collaboration, between immigrants' rights, advocates and farmers, to mitigate the trauma that's being promised and threatened. At uh, the local level is key in working with individuals who are threatened with some of these traumatic acts. I know people are doing, I think the ACLU is doing Know Your Rights trainings, and I think it's good for everybody to go to the Know Your Rights training. We've been doing them here in Kitsap County, where there's a large Guatemalan population. And some people are saying, "Oh, why should I go? I don't speak Spanish." But I think it's good. What I heard, the feedback I got was that the people from Guatemala were happy just to see that others in the community supported them, to know that not everybody was against them. So plugging into those kinds of things. Um, I know during the last Trump administration, when there were um, things like workplace raids and so forth, people did organize at schools, because teachers wanted support. Healthcare professionals organize things because they see the consequences of trauma in terms of mental health and physical health problems. Um, cities are taking action here. I don't know about in Idaho, to try their best to protect safe spaces where people can feel comfortable that they won't be arrested on the spot, and in workplaces. There are bystander trainings that people can do. One of the, well, I remember during at the beginning of the president to be's first administration, our son Michael was in middle school, and he came home from school, I think the first week, saying that one of his classmates had told him to go back to Mexico. And for those of you who don't know, yeah, Mike is like half Chinese. So, so I think learning how to respond to hate speech or comments like that. There's a site called Right to Be, and they do all kinds of free trainings. And I think it's kind of fun to do it as a group. too, so you can kind of practice, what you would say just if your coworker says something inappropriate or somebody in a grocery store line. Just so you can know how to respond appropriately. And these things, they're skill. It's a skill, to learn how to respond to those kind of things. And I heard that. Hey, I was happy to hear about the de-escalation training too, because we've been doing those here at the center. So some of this we can do at the individual level in terms of calming ourselves, regulating ourselves. Um, I, I think what I've seen in my 30 years here in the United States is some of the way that this operates, these things, is by catching people when they're vulnerable, when they're alone, when nobody's watching. I feel like, well, I'll just tell a brief story. I went down as a lawyer to Texas, and I was supposed to be part of a legal team that was interviewing children, unaccompanied children, to see what their conditions were like there. And we got there. It was me and I think two or three other lawyers, and I think two of them were Spanish speakers. We got there and we just had like 8 hours there in the facility, a detention facility, and kind of by the tents there where they were keeping people. And I think thousands of, I don't know, 1 to 2,000, maybe, I don't remember the exact number. But we were going there to interview these children. And we waited, and then an officer came out, an official who'd come out from Washington, D.C., and she told us, "Oh, the children have been moved. They're not here anymore." And so I said, "Oh, when were they moved?" It was yesterday. So, and then, so I feel like the way that these things can happen, these traumatic things can happen, is because they're not being watched closely enough by the people surrounding them. And so we have to be a little bit aggressive about making sure, I think, that every step is watched, from arrests to detentions, to actual removals. Um, what happened in that case in Texas was with this lawyer group. Then we went on, we said, okay, we'll talk to families, we'll talk to parents with children that are there. And so then they brought out a group of people who only spoke Portuguese, and not Spanish. So then we had to waste another one of our precious hours finding translators that we could plug in right away by phone. So it just shows some of the barriers that we have to be prepared to face. And it takes organization and commitment. And I hope, to me, it's an all hands on deck thing, that it really is a threat to our community. So I hope people will join together. And again, I mentioned that this wasn't going to be the focus of my sermon, but I felt called yesterday that the most important thing we could do for building a beloved community at this moment in the United States is to try to protect our immigrant neighbors and their families. So that is my message. And at the end, it comes down, like, building the beloved community does come back to love. I think love will help us overcome this, and it may be the only thing that can. So thank you.